The Honourable Philip Scott.
Thank you, President. I rise to speak in support of the motion moved by the Honourable Michelle Hoffman to refer the Assisted Reproductive Technology and Surrogacy Bill 2025 to the Standing Committee on Legislation for consideration and report. Although this bill might have been written with good intentions, the outcomes from it could create harmful and unforeseen circumstances. In the attempt to combine the existing legislation for reproductive technologies with surrogacy legislation, the bill raises serious concerns with its lack of clarity regarding the future medical risks, negative psychological impacts on both mother and child, ethical and human rights violations, and even the potential for the opportunities for child abuse. The government's attempt to cobble 3 acts into one single act results in a massive piece of legislation of over 200 pages. And if that's not enough to send it to committee, then I don't know what is. Many of you would have received correspondence from different interest groups representing women's and children's rights, giving their reasons for objecting to this legislation. It would seem to me that many in this House didn't give them consideration or simply ignored the valid objections put to the various clauses and conditions. It's disappointing that a minority group, such as the LGBTQI community, would support and promote the exploitations and potential harms to another minority group, women surrogates and the infants they carry to term and surrender after the birth. It would seem that human rights aren't always as equal and compassionate as one might expect. There are many questions on the impact of long-term medical, psychological, physical well-being and care on both the surrogate mother and the child that have not been investigated or clarified within this massive, dense and complicated legislation. A deficit, no doubt, due to the composition of the contributors and stakeholders who created this. When we look at the stakeholders that were consulted, we see no representatives from women's groups, no representatives from psychologists, but we do see a ministerial panel headed up by Dr. Roger Hart, who does have an interest in fertility clinics. Surrogate women are often themselves voiceless because they are bound by gagging orders. I always believed the Labour Party was the party of equal bargaining power. Now, you can't tell me that rich commissioning parents don't have some influence over a socially economic young girl of 18 years old who has no life experience. But we've seen this before with this Labour government, the firearms legislation. They consulted the people who would give them the result they wanted. They gave the police carte blanche to write the legislation rather than thinking it through rationally and writing it in such a manner that those who were engaged with lawful firearms and sporting clubs were consulted. It was the same with the post and boast legislation, superficially aimed at deterring juvenile crime and car stealing. But yet again, the devil was in the detail. It had provisions that would capture people innocently filming lawful protests. So I see no reason why you wouldn't refer this legislation to committee. When this motion was moved last week, there was the opportunity for some members to speak to it. This included the highlight of my short time in this place, the contribution by the Honourable Kate Doust. She spoke not just about the benefits of referring this bill to committee, but also West Australia Parliament's recent history in dealing with matters relating to ART and surrogacy and what defines a conscience vote in this place. Given most in her party room may prefer she didn't support the motion, it was a brave act of democracy and public service that the community would love to see more from their elected representatives. The Honourable Kate Dowse spoke from her wealth of parliamentary experience, which includes dealing with similar matters we are considering in this bill. And this House was blessed to have a shared experience last week. Part of what she shared with us was her experience with the Standing Committee on the Legislation's 12th report on the Surrogacy Bill 2007. Specifically, that there was a split between committee members about whether the minimum age of surrogacy should be 18, 21 or 25 years of age. President, this has been a recurring point of contention in the contributions to this debate. Should an 18-year-old woman be allowed to take on the physical and psychological risks of surrogacy? This question has been thoroughly answered in this chamber, particularly by women who would understand this situation better than I do as a man, because, of course, I cannot get pregnant. Therefore, I very much appreciate the views canvassed by women in this place when it comes to vital safeguards around surrogacy. The opposition's lead speaker on this bill, the Honourable Michelle Hoffman, went into some detail about pregnancy in her contributions. A mother of 3 children herself, she summed up very well. Pregnancy is a bit like a roller coaster. Every ride is different. She went on to discuss the complications that can arise in varying degrees whilst on the different stages of this roller coaster, and acknowledged that a woman's entire physiology changes in pregnancy. When it comes to surrogacy, there are added psychological, emotional, and physical stresses involved in the ART process on top of the general toll of pregnancy. Included in the Honourable Michelle Hoffman's contribution were many harrowing personal stories from women whose pregnancy was a more confronting roller coaster than the average one. This is what we are permitting a vulnerable 18-year-old woman to put themselves through, on behalf of someone else at grave risk of exploitation. The Honourable Kate Dowse highlighted the differences in the proposed law versus the current law, when she simply stated, an 18-year-old versus a 25-year-old is almost a lifetime of difference in life experience and challenge. I agree with that. Alongside existing minimum age laws for surrogacy is a requirement for potential surrogates to have previously given birth. This relates to the ability to obtain informed consent from potential surrogates, a key tenet of medical law and ethics. Even if a woman has never given birth, even if a woman who has never given birth can give informed consent for surrogacy in a legal sense due to being an adult, we in this place should consider if it's ethically and morally right to accept such consent as being truly informed in the context of surrogacy. As the Honourable Michelle Hoffman asked in her contribution, is it really fair to expect women who have never had a baby to understand the ramifications it will have on their life? Those ramifications include potential complications that can be so severe that a surrogate may never be able to have their own children. I must agree with the Honourable Member here. That scenario does not seem fair to me and should be avoided in this bill if it is to pass. Evidence shows the physical process of childbearing, a great burden on a woman's body, is an even greater burden in the context of surrogacy. The Honourable Marika Gronwald, spoke about this in her contribution to this motion and alluded to asking a question without notice about whether the government was tracking adverse health outcomes for surrogate mothers. The answer provided to her, no. As the Honourable Member stated, just like that, all pretences that there is sufficient consideration of the woman's well-being by this government is thrown out of the window. The Honourable Marika Gronwald might be a first-term member, but it is not her first time exploring issues relating to ART and surrogacy. As she put on the record last week, she's been immersed in this issue for 10 years. I am grateful her election to this place coincided with this bill being considered, as she has provided us with many valuable considerations. One of her more significant considerations is altruistic surrogacy versus commercial surrogacy. If this place is to function as a house of review, then the unintended consequences of any law we are to pass must be considered. Indeed, it's what the government should be considering when first drafting a bill. The potential unintended consequence of this bill is what the Honourable Marika Gronwald calls the cash for babies loophole. She outlined how this could occur in practice under clauses 107 and 112 of this bill, and I agree with her that it does not take much imagination to see how these provisions could be exploited. Whilst the Honourable Member has been immersed in this issue for a decade, some of us in this place have not, myself included. Safeguards relating to commercial surrogacy are of the highest importance for this place to get right, and laws designed to prevent it only do so to the extent that they are enforced. The Honourable Michelle Hoffman said, "We have not had the time to seriously consider the issues around commercial surrogacy," and I concur with her both in the context of commercial surrogacy and the bill as a whole. I will come back to that later. I do once again want to commend these three women for providing us with such valuable perspectives. The Honourable Kate Dowse, the longest-serving member in this place, the Honourable Marika Gronwald with 10 years of research, and the Honourable Michelle Hoffman, a mother of 3 children herself. But of course, the contributions of these 3 women had to be followed by 2 men who think they know better and have already declared that they will not support efforts to improve this bill. One of those was my honourable friend, Dr. Brian Walker, who believed that we should not question medical authorities. Now, as we all know, no profession is perfect, and I must say the Honourable Doctor is at the peak of the medical profession in terms of his ethics and treatment of patients. But it behoves each member of this House to examine all the issues without giving preference to a profession. Now, in considering this bill, I feel that we are heading towards the brave new world, where down the track we will have designer babies. I read a very interesting article by a gentleman called Wesley Smith, who has written a book called The Culture of Death, The Age of Do-Harm Medicine. I just want to quote some of the text from that because I think it's relevant. We have to ask the question, do we have the right to do whatever it takes to have a baby if that is our desire, and also to obtain the baby we want? These questions have ceased to be grist for science fiction authors. Researchers recently announced that they have genetically manipulated human skin cells to become eggs, including those of men, the idea being to eventually enable both members of a same-sex couple to have a genetic connection with their child. Then, after more genetic tinkering, the eggs can be fertilised embryos via IVF. Finally, the biotechnologists monitored embryonic development until the experiment was stopped and the embryos destroyed. Making eggs out of skin cells is just the latest example of an accelerating.
The Minister for Environment on a point of order.
Thank you, President. I've listened very carefully to the member's speech. The question before the House is a referral of the bill to the Legislation Committee. The member has veered off, I believe, into policy matters and is effectively giving a second reading speech. I think this is not consistent with the requirement to address the question before the House.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The member on his feet is considering a wide range of reasons. Some of them may be policy. I will encourage the Honourable Member to bring his comments back to the very limited scope of this question, which is reasons for referral to the committee, as distinct from the policy detail that's contained
Thank you, President.
elsewhere. So bring your considerations back to
Yes.
why this bill needs referral to committee. The Honourable Philip Scott.
Thank you, President. I did anticipate that interjection, and the point of
The Honourable Philip Scott.
Thank you, President. I apologise if I used the word interjection. It was a raising of a standing order. My apologies. Now, the reason that I seem to be digressing into this world of fertility clinics is because we're talking about billions of dollars and the fact that people with money have influence. We've seen this in other legislation, and we see that there's a lot of money to be made from exploiting those who don't have a voice. So I will, with respect to the member, divert back to the question of this bill and its referral. So my question is this: is what has changed in the last decade? A federal inquiry in 2016 into the regulatory and legislative aspects of surrogacy arrangements recommended that commercial surrogacy remain illegal. And here we have a situation in this bill where the Cook government proposes to abolish the WA Reproductive Technology Council to be replaced by the Assisted Reproductive Council, with authority going to the CEO of the Health Department. Now, one of the concerns of the 2016 inquiry was regulatory oversight. And I believe this bill needs to be referred to committee because the regulatory oversight in this bill as it stands is not sufficient and leaves open a gap, a yawning gap that my honourable colleague Rod Caddy's referred to, where people with nefarious intent can commission a child. And this is a reality. Last week, I spoke to someone who counselled people who have minor attractions. And he said, in counselling one of those people who is on the road to recovery, this person said, if I was not in this state here, it was in the East, I would be moving to West Australia once this bill was passed. Now, whatever you think of the merits of this bill, surely that would make you want to refer it to committee. I don't think criminal checks for commissioning parents is too hard to ask for, given the hurdles that foster parents have before they can have adoptees. I'd also remind the government that talks of lawless individuals, that this is a bill that is lawless in itself, because it ignores the findings of the UN rapporteur that were handed down on the 10th of October, just over a week ago, that surrogacy is a violation against women and children. I'd also remind the government that the lack of consultation with women's groups is a violation of Article 7, CEDAW, the Council for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. I'd also remind the government of Article 35 of the United Nations and the right for a child to know their biological parents. I believe in government of consultation, not decree. I believe in a government that believes that unites people to bring about the right kind of legislation that benefits all sectors of society. Now, in the bill itself, there is provision for reasonable expenses for surrogate mothers. But what determines reasonable expenses? We know that there is a 36% higher rate of postpartum depression for surrogate mothers. And yet we have the prospect of these mothers being left to fend for themselves and not being able to speak up because of commercial arrangements, because of non-disclosure agreements, because of gagging orders. I'd always believed, well, it was the case when I grew up in the UK, that the Labour Party was the party that spoke up for those who had no voice. But obviously, their conscience has been put away and shelved for a later time. When you have a bill that favours industry and doesn't consider all the ramifications, then you're on a very dangerous trajectory. We cannot have a nothing to see here approach. Who are the members of the board going to be? Who is going to appoint them of this new board? Will there be conflicts of interest? Clauses 49 to 54 remove mandatory counselling. Does this sound like a caring, compassionate government? I just feel we're becoming a dehumanised society, where the poor get left behind and the rich get richer. I would therefore suggest that when, hopefully, this bill goes to committee, there will be provisions for stronger, independent oversight that would restore and enable full public trust. You know, not long ago, we had the national apology for forced adoptions that was given by the Honourable Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister. And I believe this is relevant in requesting a referral of this bill. So I'm just going to read a very short part of this, because I know people have limited attention spans nowadays. Today, this Parliament, this is the Federal Parliament, on behalf of the Australian people, takes responsibility and apologises for the policies and practices that force separation of mothers from their babies, which created a lifelong legacy of pain and suffering. We say sorry to you, the mothers who were denied knowledge of your rights, which meant you could not provide informed consent. You were given false assurances. You were forced to endure the coercion and brutality of practices that were unethical, dishonest, and in many cases illegal. We resolve as a nation to do all in our power to make sure these practices are never repeated. In facing future challenges, we will remember the lessons of family separation. Our focus will be on protecting the fundamental rights of children and on the importance of the child's right to know and be cared for by his or her parents. Now, in this bill, it doesn't make it easy for children to find out who their true biological parents are. And in fact, in one particular clause, which I'm just trying to find, Section 98(3), if the surrogate-born person were to contact their birth mother or donor who had specified that they do not wish to be contacted by the surrogate-born person, the surrogate-born person is liable to a fine of $10,000. Now, I haven't even started on the reproductive material harvested from dead people without their permission. But I would say, as I said in my earlier speech in the second reading, if you go around to talk to people, everyday people on the street, and you were to tell them that the bills before Parliament that would allow an 18-year-old to become a surrogate, that would have no criminal safeguards for commissioning parents, they would just shake their head, and I've seen that. So in closing, I'll just quote George Orwell. "The party told you should reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was a final, most essential command." I agree with the motion to refer this bill to committee.